I'm Michael Bungay-Stanier. This is Change Signal. This is the podcast where we cut through the blather and the BS and the noise to find the good stuff that works about change and transformation. Yogi Berra, the baseball philosopher, said, "It's tough to make predictions, especially about the future." No kidding. And of course, here's the paradox for us as change leaders. It feels implicitly or explicitly very much like we need to predict the future, shape the future, control the future. That's a heavy burden. And what we've got coming up now is a conversation on how to put down that burden. How to move forward when you don't have a perfect plan and when you're not sure exactly what's going to happen. How to increase your capacity for risk and for sitting in ambiguity. What it really means to be strategic in these trying times, and what it means to have a dragonfly's perspective on things. In short, it's a conversation about the glories of imperfection.
I think the biggest thing to unlearn is this incredibly seductive idea of strategy as something that you set out in advance.
That's Charles Conn, and he is really one of the smartest people I know. I met him when he came in as the warden of Rhodes House. That's the organization behind Rhodes Scholars. And he led that place through both a reboot and a rebirth. He's founded tech companies. He's the chairman of the Patagonia board, that great company. And he's also written a number of excellent books, which we will reference in the conversation. This is going to be a terrifically helpful conversation. Charles, it's so nice to see you again.
Michael, it's so good to see you. Thanks for having me.
Your latest book is The Imperfectionist, Strategic Mindsets for Uncertain Times. Now, you've said clearly this is not about dealing with perfectionism. I mean, that's a whole nother thing. So what's this about then?
Yeah. The world is changing so quickly. Artificial intelligence, robots, automation, programmable biology. Every industry is being perturbed by external shocks all the time. In that kind of a world, it's very easy to become paralyzed by indecision.
Mm-hmm.
Than to break that paralytic moment by doing some big dumb thing.
Right.
Right? You know, this is like a giant acquisition or a 5-year plan to make a new product that by the time you get there has actually failed.
Yeah.
So I was trained in all the bad old ways of thinking, which were relevant, I think, honestly, in a world where you had slow-moving, stable, structurally stable industries like steel and chemicals and consumer products. And then we thought about campaigns. We use all the military language, structure, campaigns. And I think all that's out the window. And so if you ask, what am I? I'm an observer and hopefully a participant in the topsy-turvy world that we live in today. And not at all wedded to the ways of thinking that we've used historically.
What's been the biggest thing you found you needed to unlearn?
Yeah. I mean, I think, oh God, it's such a big bucket, isn't it, of unlearning. I feel like we should start every day as babies, right? That
right.
Zero-based thinking is such an important thing. I think the biggest thing to unlearn is this incredibly seductive idea of strategy as something that you set out in advance and that you have these bold, audacious objectives and you develop the tactics that support the strategy and the troops go out and execute and that there's this great brain that's guiding all of this, which I think this is an image that we took from battle,
right.
Whether it was Napoleonic or the great battles of the Second World War. And I think in the early post-war period, when we were creating the big industrial combines of today, we consciously or unconsciously adopted that way of thinking. Big man up top, making the call, organizing the troops, and heading out into battle. And I think that's a deeply fundamentally flawed way of thinking, more than ever today, always was. Yeah. Right?
And so imperfection?
The idea of embracing imperfectionism is a very explicit act which is to accept that we will never have a perfect ex ante plan, right? And therefore, what we should do is begin to take steps now.
Right.
Without waiting for perfect clarity, perfect vision. And those steps will be small, relatively reversible, relatively low consequence steps most of the time.
Right.
Rooted in curiosity, definitely seeing things through multiple lenses.
Experimental.
But fundamentally experimental.
Yeah.
Exactly. Let's taste these things. Let's try these things. Let's see if we can build our knowledge and capability of this fast-changing world. And let's start to build some assets that actually will be the beginnings of a new strategic approach.
So where do you begin to place this idea of experimenting in the mindset and culture and change capacity of an organization?
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, look, I think there's 1,000 answers to that question. But let me try a couple of small ones. One, get people working in small teams, ideally cross-functional teams,
right,
on real and present problems. So that would be part A. And part B would be trust them and have them work in as non-hierarchical ways as they possibly can.
Right.
And listen intently to what they come up with, especially if those teams are as close as they possibly can be to customers and markets. I know that sounds like a weird thing, but when you put people in those environments and you water them with trust,
right,
meaning we're interested in hearing what you have to say, you give people confidence that they can actually solve problems. And you never hear statements like, that's above my pay grade. No, it isn't.
right,
Right? That's old language, right?
right,
That's hierarchy language. The more people can work in these teams, which are goal-directed, and the more that we trust them and are willing to experiment with their solutions, especially where those solutions have relatively low consequences if the experiment doesn't work, the more people build their confidence that whatever their level in the organization is, that they actually can make change. And that strategy isn't something that's done up here and operations or execution is done down here. That's dumb.
And just jumping in to say that if this is ringing bells for you, make sure you revisit the very first pod episode of Change Signal. That was with Pim de Moray, and in it we go deep into self-managing organizations. There are some people who are listening to this who will be going, Charles, that sounds delightful, but I work in this place.
Yeah.
So I don't want people to feel like they're like, oh, I have to be in some sort of cool, hip, maybe Silicon Valley-esque organization to think about the possibility of this. Is there a way of doing this within a more traditional hierarchy? I mean, how do you act like this?
Yeah, honestly, I think there is. Obviously, it's gotten harder than it used to be, right? Because span of control, using, again, old language, has become bigger.
Yeah.
So we're asking people we call managers to have 13, 20 direct reports instead of 7 or 8. We've removed so many people from the middle layers of management, and especially in the big old-fashioned companies, telephone companies, insurers, pension funds, big tech companies, that it is a little bit harder to create that feeling of team. But I actually think even in those kinds of companies, instead of working sort of in bullpens where we have atomized work, the more we can actually work in pods where we're working together, where we're sharing ideas, even if we happen to be working in a functional area rather than a cross-functional team.
Yeah.
If we're sharing ideas in non-hierarchical way with our colleagues, if we're encouraged for curiosity, if we're encouraged to see things through multiple lenses rather than one lens, if we're open to small experiments as long as they don't sort of bet the farm, and especially if we're willing to see our organizational boundaries as perhaps a bit more permeable, right? A little more open, so we're open to ideas from outside, sometimes called crowdsourcing. The more you create those 4 characteristics, and then the last one that we already discussed, which is trust.
Yes.
Right? You can do this in any kind of organization. You could do it in a prison.
You talk about small experiments. I get excited when I hear this. I also get nervous because I'm like, wait, the whole thing about experiments is like half of them, maybe more than half of them don't really work. You made the point that you're not trying to bet the farm, and actually a more subtle point, which is, failure won't be destructive. How would you coach me to increase or be able to set up experiments where I could tolerate failure?
Yeah, and obviously, this does, and again, if you're working down in an organization somewhere and you have a manager working with that manager around why experimentation with low consequences, it doesn't put anything at risk, is
Yeah.
important. If
Yeah.
you are one of those managers, and many people listening to this podcast are one of those managers, to sort of unclench a little bit.
That's such a good verb.
Right.
Yeah.
Sort of imagine sphincter relaxing.
Exactly.
Maybe I'm going to say names of people who I think have done this well, and they may be sort of wonderful or not wonderful as humans. But Jeff Bezos built Amazon from literally a garage, level enterprise to be one of the biggest retail organizations that's ever existed. He's really good on this topic.
Right.
And he defines two types of decisions, right? Type 1 decisions and type 2 decisions. Type 1 decisions are the big decisions through which the door doesn't swing both ways, where you actually are betting the farm.
Right. Once the decision's made, it is made, and there's no going back.
And it's consequential. And if you screw it up, and those decisions really do need to be pushed up to, boards and top managers, because they involve all the assets and the physical safety of the company. Type 2 decisions don't. And I think Bezos very correctly said, hey, those kind of decisions where it isn't a bet the budget type decision, you should push those as far as you can down to the people who are close to competitors, who are close to customers, young dreamers who haven't been grooved yet into the way this organization thinks.
Right.
And I just love that way of thinking. And if you're one of those managers down in organizations, and most of us are, right? Don't be afraid to encourage your teams to do those kinds of low consequence experiments. When you think about Amazon entering consumer financial services, there was no grand strategy.
Right.
They didn't take $4 billion and buy a bank, right? They could have done that. They didn't. They made an investment in this little company. They bought the team from this failed fintech. They collaborated with some IP with another technology provider over here. All of those particular things that I just described actually failed.
Yeah.
But they didn't fail. Those teams that were trying to think about how do we enter consumer financial services got a little smarter. They developed some capabilities. They maybe even got some assets.
Yeah.
And then they were more confident about how they approached their problems. If you're that manager or you're one of those team members, that kind of freedom to experiment within the sandbox of didn't bet the farm, right, makes all of our jobs more interesting. Think about it. Like the last thing you want to be is, here's how we do it here.
Yeah, exactly.
Nobody wants to be in that job, right? And that's why for both the manager and the team member, the right coaching is, let's create an environment, all of us together, where we share ideas and where there's no bad ideas, there's no punishment for a dumb idea, and there's no punishment for a good experiment that had a bad outcome, as long as it doesn't break the organization.
Yeah. I mean, I heard a leadership thinker, writer from ages ago, Mike Abrashoff, say, look, he was one of these people who, like, I was a U.S. Navy captain. I had a successful ship, and then I spent the next 40 years talking about it. But he had a great analogy to this. He said, look, there are two types of mistakes: above the waterline mistakes and below the waterline mistakes.
Love it.
And
Love it.
You're like, you need to encourage the above the waterline mistakes, and you've got to be really clear about avoiding the below the waterline mistakes. And
never heard that one, but I love it.
And it leads me to this next question. I mean, one of the things I admire you for, Charles, and you see this in your book, Bulletproof Problem Solving, as well, is a kind of rigor of thinking. How would you help people get better able to understand what's at risk? Because that's what you're asking when you run an experiment, which is like figure out what's at risk, and if it's not too bad, run the experiment.
Yeah.
But my experience of myself and others as well is I catastrophize and I overemphasize what's at risk. And I'm wondering how you'd teach me to do better.
I love your question. So I think my answer is, and again, I'm a person of modest intelligence who went far in life by breaking things down. So whenever I get frozen because it all seems so complicated, which it does, and then it's very easy to catastrophize, right? Because you can imagine all the things that can go wrong.
Yeah.
I do this sort of little mantra, which is I remind myself what problem I'm actually trying to solve, because it's usually more narrow than your sort of dream state mind, right? Which tends to makes problems too big. Let's really get very specific about what we're trying to do.
So good.
And then the most important thing for me is I like to break things to their component parts, right?
Yeah.
Because it's amazing to me how clarifying it is to do these three things. Make sure I know the problem, break a problem apart, break the problem into its constituent parts. Then I can see all the parts. Usually there's 2 or 3 different ways to do that. Find the one that works best for your problem.
Yeah.
And then my next step is I try and figure out which are the parts of the problem that have a big impact on solving the problem.
Right.
And that are not that hard to move. And I know that I can manage my risk by working on the high leverage bits of the problem that have the biggest impact on the problem. And so when I break things down with those 3 simple steps, all of a sudden I have a mental clarity that gives me a little bit of confidence, and I know where the risks lay, right? The risks lay with those parts of the problem that take heaven and earth to move, or where the downside risk if something goes wrong is huge, right? Or the worst kind of thing, right? Which are hard to move and then don't actually contribute very much to the solution. If you can get on that, which I call critical path, right? The critical path is I work on the parts of the problem that have a big impact and that I can actually personally be involved in changing. Then I can manage my risk, and I'm more likely to make a breakthrough than if I focused on the whole problem always is scary.
That's such a powerful insight. I mean, my 2x2 brain goes to that kind of 2x2 matrix, which is like, impact, high, low, easy to do something about it, high, low. And then, anything that's low impact and hard to do, well, ignore that. It's as tempting as it will feel. But if you can find something in that top right-hand corner, which is like, this will have a high impact and I can actually have some influence here.
Well, it's one of my favorite. I mean, I love 2x2s.
Yeah.
And it's one of my favorite ones because whenever you're sitting there stuck, it's always the first thing you should be, make sure you know your problem. But the first thing you should do is start to bucket the potential paths.
If you'd like to dive deeper into Charles's work, I recommend you check out bulletproofthinking.com. There's a wide range of resources there to help you be more agile and also more robust in figuring out what to do and how. Charles, in your book, you talk about the power of the dragonfly eye, and you hinted at that around different perspectives. Why is that actually helpful? I mean, so often when you're in your own perspective, you're like, my perspective is so good and it feels so right.
The reason for that is we start off as curious children, right? And we don't understand anything about the world, and we explore everything with our fingers and our mouths, right? And then we get a little bit older and we start asking why. And children ask hundreds of questions an hour, right? And then what we start to do, and it's wonderful, right, is we start to impose little solution paths on everything that work.
Right.
So how do I keep my shoes on? I learn how to do this quite complicated thing, which is tying a shoe.
I've never got there. I'm still using Velcro. One day I'm going to get to this whole knot tying thing, but I get other people have mastered that, sure.
Right on, man. But the point is we develop heuristics for the world that work.
Yeah.
But they also blind us, right? The thing about heuristics is they're only as good as the stability of the world in front of us. And the problem is
Right.
the world that we live in today is not stable anymore. And so when we work inside an organization, not just successful ones, especially successful ones,
Mm-hmm.
we have a tendency to repeat the success pattern that worked 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, because we told ourselves stories about why we're successful.
Right.
And we get grooved and rooted in the way we did things that created the organization that exists.
Yeah.
If you can see things through multiple lenses, and again, the analogy is the 3,000 lenses that make up a dragonfly's eye, we don't even really know how they see, but we know they have 3 different types of vision.
Right.
But that idea of seeing things through different perspectives before you jump in, asking everything you do, put a question mark next to it so that you're actually open to a different interpretation. The simplest exercise is to say, how do my customers see me? How do my competitors see me? How do my suppliers see me? What are 3 other ways you could provide this product? Like, these are all different lenses for looking through. I'm going to give you an example, right? And
Please.
I love this example. So, have you heard of Invisalign?
I have. My wife, who is in her 60s, has had the insult of having to have braces for the last year and a half. She has talked about it every single day.
Right.
Because she's like, God damn it, I'm in my 60s. But I know exactly what you're talking about.
So we used to have these amazing metal devices that we would literally epoxy to people's teeth.
Exactly.
Right? And then we would tighten them using something that looked like a spanner, right? And at nighttime you'd have to wear this gear, and it was the most dreaded. And specialists were trained called orthodontists, were trained to do this, and it cost thousands and thousands of dollars for your parents to do, or in your case, you and your wife.
Yeah. I had braces for 7 years myself, so
7 years.
It's a long story,
brother. That is a serious sentence.
Yeah.
Couple of kids at Stanford Business School, one of whom had to wear braces at Stanford Business School because he didn't have enough dough. He came from a developing country, didn't have enough dough until he'd been an investment banking analyst for a couple of years to get braces. And what he noticed was that when he forgot to wear his retainer, once his braces were off, he forgot to wear his retainer, it hurt to put it back in.
Right.
And once he had it in place, after a couple of days, it didn't hurt anymore. Why didn't it hurt anymore? Because that clear plastic retainer moved his teeth too.
Yeah.
And so he and his classmate, who was a friend of mine, thought, I wonder if you had a graduated set of these relatively clear, hard plastic retainers, if you could move teeth the way this horrible metal apparatus could move teeth. Turns out they could.
Yeah.
Right? Now, the dental industry didn't want anything to do with them. They didn't know anything about dentistry. By seeing the idea of straight teeth through the lens of the consumer, they created a $15 or $20 billion company.
Yeah.
Right? And it didn't come out of professional orthodontists who'd spend all their years studying it, because they only saw orthodontia through one lens.
Yeah.
And these kids created one of the coolest things in the world that makes everyone's lives better.
Unless you're an orthodontist.
And it sucked for orthodontists, right? Because as it turns out that the people who fit these things now could just be any dentist.
Yeah.
Or even dental hygienist. And so at the same time, it lowered prices, it democratized this, it gave much better curbside appeal, so you didn't feel awkward when you went on a date. Kissing is better. Life is better, right?
Life is better.
Life is better because they did a dragonfly eye view of this that changed everything.
Yeah. Charles, if I'm leading change within an organization, and you've got a great experience being within organizations, do you have some suggested lenses? I mean, how far do I go out? Because I can go, look, I need to get the perspective from my sponsor or the kind of the C-suite in some way. And I need to get the perspective of the body of employees I'm trying to move from A to B. And maybe I need the perspective from the people we serve as well, so I get some sense of that.
Yeah.
Do you think, is that enough, or are there other perspectives I should be chasing?
Yeah, I mean, those are good ones, by the way. Yeah. And I think, looking at the people you should be serving is a hell of a good place to start.
Yeah.
But it's really interesting to me. Humans love to confirm their ideas,
Right.
right?
Yeah,
The most
confirmation
important,
bias.
the most important cognitive bias is confirmation bias, and there's a big whack of them, but that's the most important one. We develop these heuristics about the world, and then we seek data that confirms our heuristic, right?
Yeah.
Most important human. It makes the world work, by the way. It sounds like a bad thing, but it also makes the world work. But it means that when we're doing this perspective taking that we just described, we usually are looking for data that reinforces our idea. So we talk to customers who like us, right? We talk to colleagues who think we're doing great stuff. We talk to suppliers who think we're the shit, right?
Right.
No, the most important thing is to talk to people who aren't impressed by you. And that means customers who are unhappy. So don't go to your list of customers and talk to the 80% who give you a 4 or 5 stars. Talk to the 20% who give you 3 stars or less. When you read the Amazon book reviews on your book that has now 50,000 reviews, right? Or 500,000 reviews, right?
Yeah.
I guarantee you don't look at the ones that say, this is the best thing I've ever read. The first thing you do is go to those single stars and say, where did I miss?
Yeah.
And so when we're perspective taking, let's find the people where we missed and see if there's a nugget or a gem. When I was doing the Rhodes Trust thing, I thought we should have Rhodes scholarships in China.
Right.
And lots of people around me said, that's perfect. China's up and coming. We should do this. Fantastic. And then I had this one guy who was the national secretary of the Rhodes Scholarship in Hong Kong, who was a deeply experienced China hand. And he said, this is the worst idea I've ever seen in my life. And then I immediately thought of all the ways I could oust him from his position. No, I wanted to oust him from his position.
Right.
And get him out of the organization.
Oh, got him. Yeah.
Right. And yes, barring that, I'm joking a little bit here, but barring that, I thought of all the 1,000 ways as a former McKinsey consultant I could win him over.
Yeah.
And then I thought, no, hold on a second. That's not the right way to think about this. If you really want to be of service in the world, you should stop trying to convince him. You should ask him, why do you think that?
Yeah.
So I developed this dialogue with this guy who hated my idea. And it was such a wonderful thing. I learned so much about the world from listening to this guy. And you know where we ended up? We ended up with Rhodes Scholarships for China. And they were so much better because of engaging with Eric, was this guy's name. He made them 1,000 times better, and he became a huge supporter.
Yeah. If I'm trying to manage a reluctant boss, I think of primarily the people I'm working with. I'm gonna say kind of like they're directors and they're VPs, but they're not CXOs. Do you have any insight around what it takes to be adept with a C-suite that will have its own agenda and will have its own perspective?
Yeah, I mean, of course, it can be tough, and we shouldn't pretend like this stuff is easy because it isn't easy. Well, I'll say 2 things. One is almost all those people like to be presented with a suite of ideas rather than a single solution.
Right.
And they love being pre-fed for their hierarchical conversation. So if they're going in to see the person above them,
give them make you look good. I'm going to help your boss think you're better than you might be. Yeah,
you just said it.
Yeah,
you just said it. So give them 4 or 5 nuggets. Again, I like to use tree-based organization. Make sure they get it in advance of when they're going to see their boss. You don't need to be the author of that. Let them be the author of that. Right. And then all of a sudden they go, damn. That person's helpful over here. And all of a sudden your ideas, and if they do look good, all of a sudden they start to open up, warm up to this way of doing things. God, we all went through this, right? We went through the 70s, the Jack Welch way of doing things.
If that's a new name for you, Jack Welch was the famous/infamous CEO of GE in the 80s and 90s. He was known for ruthlessly firing the bottom 10% of his performers each year, ruthlessly selling off business units that weren't overperforming. And while that did work well for a while, it really, really stopped working well pretty quickly.
And then we started figuring out that all those companies failed.
Yeah.
We just broke up GE. They don't exist anymore. The average tenure on the S&P 500, used to be 18 years. Now it's 8.
Yeah.
This is crazy stuff, right? I think the world knows now, and even in the big hierarchical organizations, we know that we got to be looking over our shoulder. And to be looking over our shoulder, we have to be working with folks down below us and encouraging them. And we have to be more open to permeable organization boundaries, so we source our ideas from the best possible places. I hope there are very few hidebound folks left who crush that kind of bubbling up of enthusiasm from below.
Charles, this has been such a great conversation. Is there anything that needs to be said that hasn't been said around?
Got one thing.
Yeah, please.
I got one thing. So we've talked about anchoring outside, being open to tapping into collective intelligence. One thing we didn't talk about is the power of storytelling. And for me, it's just like, we live in this world, not only is it changing faster and faster, but there's so much information that's produced every day now compared to all the previous information in history, and it lacks credibility. There's no Walter Cronkite anymore. And therefore, the power of telling stories well has never been more important.
That's great.
And stories are things that don't only speak to our brains, they speak to our hearts. And when we can engage people in telling stories about why experimentation and new ideas and bringing ideas from outside and trying new things, right? If we can engage people in their hearts as well as their minds, we open them up in a way to change that could never, ever be true from McKinsey-style graphics or tables.
Yeah.
For me, all organizations are, and all humans, like we're fundamentally around the fire telling stories.
Yep.
Don't forget that.
So Charles is ex-McKinsey. He's the chair of the board of Patagonia. That's a $1.5 billion company. He's the founder of a number of startups. This is not some dude in an ivory tower pontificating. It is somebody wrestling with the new reality of being smart and effective and change capable in uncertain times. I think there's a lot to be encouraged by in this conversation. And I'm encouraged by your ongoing support of this podcast. So thank you. Thanks for the reviews. Thanks for spreading the word on LinkedIn and also to the people you know. I'm glad you're doing the work. Thanks for being here.